The champagne glass slipped from my hand as I watched my sister Vanessa press her lips against my fiancé Ryan's mouth, in what was supposed to be the garden pavilion where I would cut my engagement cake in 20 minutes. The crystal shattered against the marble steps of Rosewood Manor's terrace, but the sound was nothing compared to the crash of my world collapsing around me. What they didn't know, as they whispered sweet promises to each other in the moonlight, was that I had already rewritten my father's will 3 days ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Amanda Parker, and at 29, I had just witnessed the most calculated betrayal of my life during what should have been the happiest evening I'd ever experienced. The Grandview Country Club's most elegant ballroom was filled with 200 guests celebrating my engagement to the man who was currently planning his future with my younger sister. But while Vanessa believed she was stealing my happiness along with my inheritance, she had no idea that I had been watching, documenting and preparing for this moment for over 2 months. The evening had started exactly as I had anticipated it would. Ryan arrived at the manor looking devastatingly handsome in his midnight blue tuxedo, the same color that brought out the steel gray of his eyes that had first captivated me during our college years at Yale. He kissed my cheek with the perfect amount of affection for our guests to see, his hand lingering on my waist just long enough to maintain the facade of devotion that had fooled everyone except me for the past 8 weeks. Vanessa had chosen her dress with surgical precision, a deep emerald silk that complemented her auburn hair and made her green eyes appear almost luminous under the pavilion's string lights. At 26, she possessed the kind of effortless beauty that had always commanded attention wherever she went. But tonight, she had selected every detail of her appearance to outshine me at my own engagement party. The neckline was just low enough to be inappropriate for a family celebration, the hemline short enough to ensure every man in attendance would notice her legs, and the color bold enough to draw focus away from my carefully chosen ivory cocktail dress. What neither of them realized was that their affair had been unfolding under my careful observation since early July, when I had discovered a hotel receipt in Ryan's jacket pocket for a weekend in Newport that coincided exactly with Vanessa's mysterious girl's trip to the same coastal town. The receipt had been for a suite at the Ocean House, booked under his name but with 2 guests listed, and charged to the credit card he thought I knew nothing about. That discovery had triggered a methodical investigation that would have impressed my late father, who had built Parker Industries from a small vineyard into a multi-million-dollar wine distribution empire through his legendary attention to detail and strategic thinking. I had inherited more than just his business acumen and his estate. I had inherited his understanding that knowledge was power, only when it was properly documented and strategically deployed. Grace Henderson had been my father's attorney for over 15 years before becoming mine after his sudden heart attack 6 months earlier. More importantly, she had been my roommate during our first year at Harvard Law, before I switched to business administration, and she continued toward her legal career. When I called her on that July morning after finding the hotel receipt, her response had been immediate and decisive. "How certain are you about what this means?" she had asked during our emergency lunch meeting at a discreet restaurant in Hartford, far from Millbrook Valley's social circles where every conversation was potential gossip. "Certain enough to want protection," I had replied, sliding the photocopied receipt across the table along with several photographs I had discreetly taken of text messages on Ryan's phone during previous weeks. The messages themselves were innocuous, enough individually, but when arranged chronologically, they revealed a pattern of communication that coincided with Ryan's unexplained absences and Vanessa's increasingly frequent visits to the manor. Grace had studied the evidence with the careful attention that had made her one of Connecticut's most respected estate attorneys before her 40th birthday. Her expression had remained professionally neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated she was processing information that confirmed suspicions she had been too diplomatic to voice previously. "Your father updated his will just before his death," she had said finally, pulling out a thick folder from her briefcase. He made some changes that I don't think you're fully aware of. And given what you're showing me, I think we need to discuss them immediately. The original will had been straightforward enough. As the elder daughter and the one who had worked alongside him at Parker Industries since graduating from business school, I was set to inherit 60% of the estate, including controlling interest in the company and primary ownership of Rosewood Manor. Vanessa, who had shown little interest in the family business during her pursuit of a modeling career in New York, was designated to receive 30%, with the remaining 10% allocated to various charitable organizations that had been important to our family. What I hadn't known was that my father had included a provision that would redistribute the inheritance if I married someone he deemed unsuitable for managing the family legacy. The clause was carefully worded and legally airtight, requiring my future husband to meet specific criteria related to character, financial responsibility, and commitment to preserving the Parker family values. Failure to meet these standards would result in my inheritance being reduced to 30%, with Vanessa's portion increased accordingly. "He never mentioned this clause to you?" Grace had asked, watching my reaction carefully as I absorbed the implications of what she was explaining. "Never," I had confirmed, though as I reflected on our conversations during his final months, I began to remember subtle questions he had asked about Ryan's business ventures and long-term goals that had seemed like polite interest at the time but now revealed deeper concerns. My father had been a shrewd judge of character, built through decades of negotiating with suppliers, distributors, and competitors who often tried to take advantage of what they perceived as a small family operation. His success had come from his ability to see through surface charm to underlying motivations, and apparently, he had seen something in Ryan that concerned him enough to build protection into his estate planning. The discovery of the inheritance clause had transformed my approach to the situation entirely. Instead of confronting Ryan and Vanessa immediately about their affair, I had begun treating the engagement period as an extended evaluation process, quietly documenting Ryan's behavior while simultaneously putting measures in place to protect both my inheritance and my future. Marcus Thompson had been recommended by Grace as a private investigator who specialized in discrete matrimonial cases involving significant assets. His background included 15 years with the Connecticut State Police before transitioning to private practice, and his reputation for thorough, legally admissible evidence gathering had made him the preferred investigator for several prominent family law attorneys throughout the state. "I don't want to destroy anyone," I had explained during our initial meeting in his Hartford office, a modest space that belied the sophisticated surveillance equipment visible in the adjacent room. "I want to protect myself and make informed decisions based on complete information." Marcus had nodded with understanding that suggested he had handled similar cases involving family betrayals and significant financial stakes. "The best protection is always preparation," he had said, beginning to outline a comprehensive approach that would provide the kind of documentation that could withstand legal challenges if the situation escalated. The investigation that followed had been methodical and devastating in its thoroughness. Marcus had tracked Ryan's movements through credit card records, documented his meetings with Vanessa through discreet surveillance, and even uncovered evidence of their relationship that predated my engagement by several months. The affair hadn't been a sudden temptation. It had been a calculated plan that began shortly after my father's death, when the full extent of the Parker family wealth became public knowledge through probate court filings. What emerged from weeks of careful documentation was a pattern that revealed Ryan's true motivations for proposing to me. His own family's construction business had been struggling financially for over a year, with several projects delayed due to permit issues and cost overruns that had stretched their credit lines to dangerous levels. Marriage to me would provide not only access to my inheritance but also potential business partnerships with Parker Industries' extensive network of suppliers and contractors. Vanessa's role in the scheme had been equally calculating. Despite her apparent disinterest in the family business, she had been quietly researching the company's financial structure and growth potential. Her modeling career had stalled after several disappointing seasons, and she was facing the reality that her trust fund payments would not be sufficient to maintain the lifestyle she desired long-term. Seducing Ryan away from me would position her to potentially claim a larger portion of the inheritance while eliminating me as competition for family leadership. The most damaging evidence had come from recordings of their conversations in locations where they believed they had complete privacy. Marcus had obtained legal authorization for limited surveillance based on concerns about potential financial fraud, and the recordings revealed discussions about wedding timelines, business integration, plans and strategies for gradually marginalizing my influence within the family company after the marriage. "She'll be so focused on playing wife that she won't notice us repositioning things," Vanessa's voice had been captured saying during a lunch meeting at a restaurant in Hartford where they thought no one would recognize them. Besides, Amanda has always been too trusting. She actually believes that everyone has her best interests at heart. Ryan's response had been equally revealing of his character and intentions. The engagement party will be perfect timing to start subtly undermining her confidence. If she starts doubting herself, she'll be more likely to defer to my judgment on business decisions after we're married. Your father's will gives me significant leverage once we're legally bound. Those recordings had been transcribed and authenticated through proper legal channels, creating a comprehensive record of their intentions that could be presented as evidence if necessary. More importantly, they had provided me with complete clarity about the situation I was facing and the people I was dealing with. Grace had worked with me to develop a response strategy that would protect my interests while providing opportunities for Ryan and Vanessa to demonstrate their true characters publicly. The key was timing everything perfectly so that their own actions would create the consequences they deserved, without requiring me to engage in the kind of vindictive behavior that could reflect poorly on my character or judgment. The inheritance clause your father included was designed to protect you from exactly this situation, Grace had explained during one of our strategy sessions. He understood that wealth attracts people with questionable motivations, and he wanted to ensure you had legal recourse if someone tried to manipulate you for financial gain. The solution had been elegant in its simplicity. Working within the existing legal framework my father had established, we had prepared documentation that would automatically trigger the inheritance redistribution if Ryan's character deficiencies were formally established through documented evidence of fraud or deliberate deception. The recordings and surveillance materials Marcus had gathered provided more than sufficient proof to meet the legal standards required. Additionally, Grace had helped me establish a new family trust structure that would place my inheritance under my complete control regardless of my marital status, effectively nullifying the leverage Ryan believed marriage would provide him. The process had required several weeks of careful legal maneuvering, but it had been completed 3 days before the engagement party, ensuring that my financial security was protected regardless of how the evening unfolded. Daniel Morrison had managed the Parker family's financial affairs for over a decade, working closely with my father to build and diversify the wealth that Parker Industries had generated. His involvement in our protective measures had been crucial, because he understood both the business implications of the family dynamics and the practical steps necessary to safeguard the company's operations during any personal upheaval. Your father anticipated this kind of situation, Daniel had confirmed during our confidential meeting the week before the engagement party. He specifically instructed me to watch for signs that someone might be pursuing you for financial rather than personal reasons. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The provisions he put in place were designed to give you options if you ever found yourself in a compromised position. Those provisions included pre-signed authorization documents that would allow me to assume complete control of Parker Industries immediately if circumstances required it, bypassing the normal transition timeline that would have gradually transferred authority over several years. My father had also established separate accounts that would ensure my personal financial security, even if the main inheritance were somehow compromised through legal challenges or family disputes. The final element of our preparation had involved carefully selected members of our household and professional staff who could serve as witnesses to any relevant events or conversations. Helen Rodriguez, our longtime wedding planner, had been briefed on the possibility that the engagement party might not proceed as originally planned, and she had positioned herself and her staff to document any unusual occurrences discreetly. Eleanor Whitmore, my grandmother's closest friend, and a woman whose judgment had been trusted by 3 generations of Parker women, had agreed to attend the engagement party specifically to observe the family dynamics and provide an independent perspective on the evening's events. At 78, Eleanor possessed both the social standing and the sharp intelligence necessary to serve as a credible witness if legal proceedings became necessary. Sophie Williams, my maid of honor and closest friend since our college days, had been brought into the situation gradually as evidence mounted about Ryan and Vanessa's betrayal. Her role was to provide emotional support while also serving as another witness to any relevant conversations or behaviors that might occur during the engagement party. The elaborate preparations had been completed by the morning of the engagement party, creating a comprehensive framework that would allow truth to emerge naturally while protecting my interests regardless of how Ryan and Vanessa chose to proceed. Every possible scenario had been anticipated and planned for, from a complete confession and apology to an escalated attempt to manipulate the situation further. What I hadn't anticipated was how emotionally prepared I would feel when the moment of truth finally arrived. Months of careful observation and strategic planning had provided a clarity that made the actual betrayal feel almost anticlimactic. Instead of devastation, I felt a strange sense of relief as I watched them embrace in the garden pavilion, knowing that their choices were finally going to align with the consequences they deserved. The champagne glass shattering against the marble steps had been the only uncontrolled element of the evening, a reflexive response to seeing the visual confirmation of what I had known intellectually for weeks. But even that moment of shock had been brief, quickly replaced by the calm satisfaction of knowing that every move they made from that point forward would only strengthen the case I had already built against them. Standing there in the shadows of the terrace, watching my sister and my fiancé plan what they believed would be their triumphant future together, I allowed myself a small smile. They had been so focused on what they thought they were taking from me that they had never considered what I might have already taken from them. The inheritance they were scheming to claim had been restructured beyond their reach. The family business they hoped to control was already secured under my independent authority, and the reputation they thought they could manipulate through their betrayal was about to be protected by their own documented words and actions. Tomorrow would bring confrontations, legal proceedings, and the complex process of rebuilding my personal life without the people who had been closest to me. But tonight, as I prepared to walk back into my own engagement party with complete knowledge of who my sister and fiancé really were, I felt more powerful and more certain of my own judgment than I had since my father's death. The game they thought they were winning had been over since the moment I decided to start playing by different rules, and they were about to discover that the Parker family had not maintained its success for 3 generations by underestimating the opposition or failing to protect what mattered most. The walk back through the French doors into the ballroom required every ounce of composure I had cultivated during years of business negotiations and family social obligations. The crystal chandelier cast warm light across the faces of guests, who had no idea that the evening's celebrated couple had just imploded in the garden pavilion behind them. I moved through conversations about wedding plans and business ventures with the same grace I had always maintained. But now each smile and pleasantry served a different purpose entirely. Eleanor Whitmore caught my eye from across the room where she was engaged in conversation with several family friends near the champagne fountain. At 78, she possessed an elegance that commanded respect from everyone who met her. But more importantly, she had the sharp intelligence of someone who had navigated Hartford's social and business circles for over 5 decades. Her subtle nod indicated she had observed something significant, and I made my way toward her with the casual movement of a hostess checking on her guests. "Amanda, darling, Eleanor said as I approached, her voice carrying the perfect blend of warmth and authority that had made her my grandmother's most trusted confidant. "I was just telling the Hendersons about your father's remarkable vineyard expansion plans. Such vision he had for growing the business thoughtfully, rather than simply chasing short-term profits." The comment seemed innocuous to the other guests, but I recognized it as Eleanor's way of establishing my connection to the family business legacy in front of witnesses. She had positioned herself strategically throughout the evening, ensuring that key conversations about my role in Parker Industries and my future leadership plans were documented through social interaction rather than formal statements. "My father always said that the best investments require patience and careful planning," I replied, accepting a fresh champagne glass from a passing server. "He taught me that rushing into major decisions without complete information usually leads to regrettable outcomes." Mrs. Henderson, whose husband served on the board of directors for several local charities that had benefited from Parker family donations, smiled approvingly. "Your father was such a wise man. I'm sure he would be proud to see how thoughtfully you're approaching your engagement and your responsibilities to the family business." The conversation continued for several minutes, covering topics that established my character, my connection to the community, and my commitment to maintaining the values that had built the Parker family reputation. Eleanor guided the discussion with subtle skill, ensuring that each topic reinforced my position as the legitimate heir to both the business and the family's social standing. As the group began to disperse, Eleanor lingered beside me, ostensibly admiring the floral arrangements that Helen Rodriguez had created for the evening. "The garden pavilion provides such lovely views this time of evening," she said quietly, her tone remaining conversational for anyone who might be listening. "I noticed some guests have been taking advantage of the moonlight for private conversations." Her meaning was unmistakable. Eleanor had witnessed the scene between Vanessa and Ryan, and her presence as an independent observer would provide crucial credibility if the situation required formal documentation later. More importantly, her comment indicated that she was prepared to support whatever action I deemed necessary, drawing on the loyalty she had maintained to our family for decades. "Some conversations are more revealing than others," I replied, maintaining the same casual tone while acknowledging that I understood both what she had seen and what it meant for the evening ahead. Ryan reappeared in the ballroom approximately 15 minutes after I had witnessed his embrace with Vanessa, his expression carefully composed, but his eyes slightly too bright with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was operating under significant stress. He approached me with the confident stride he had always used in social situations, but I noticed the subtle signs of agitation that would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't spent months studying his behavioral patterns. "There you are." "Beautiful," he said, sliding his arm around my waist with practiced familiarity. "I was looking for you everywhere. I thought we could make the announcement about the wedding date before people start heading home." His performance was flawless for the assembled guests, conveying exactly the right blend of affection and excitement that would be expected from a newly engaged man eager to share his happiness. But I could feel the tension in his grip, and I noticed that he avoided making direct eye contact for more than a few seconds at a time. "Of course," I replied, allowing him to guide me toward the small stage that had been set up for toasts and announcements. "I've been looking forward to sharing our news with everyone." The irony of the moment was almost overwhelming. Ryan believed he was manipulating me into a public commitment that would make it more difficult for me to extricate myself from our engagement once his affair with Vanessa became known. What he didn't realize was that every word he spoke in front of our guests was being observed by people who would later be able to testify about his deceptive behavior and calculated manipulation. As we moved through the crowd toward the stage, I spotted Vanessa near the back of the room, her emerald dress catching the light as she positioned herself where she could observe Ryan's performance. Her expression conveyed the perfect combination of sisterly support and excitement for my happiness. but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes as she watched what she believed was Ryan's final manipulation of my trust and affection. Sophie Williams appeared at my side as we reached the stage, her role as maid of honor providing natural cover for her presence during what everyone expected to be a romantic announcement. "You look radiant tonight," she said, her voice loud, enough for nearby guests to hear clearly. "I can't wait to hear what you and Ryan have planned." Her words were chosen carefully, establishing her as a witness to my apparent happiness and Ryan's public declarations, while positioning her to observe his behavior during the announcement. As my closest friend and someone who had known me since college, Sophie's testimony about my emotional state and Ryan's conduct would carry significant weight if legal proceedings became necessary. Ryan cleared his throat as conversations quieted and guests turned their attention toward the stage. The moment felt surreal, standing beside the man who had just been planning his future with my sister while he prepared to publicly declare his commitment to me. But instead of feeling betrayed or humiliated, I felt a strange sense of anticipation for what was about to unfold. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Amanda and me," Ryan began, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom with the confidence that had always made him effective in social situations. "When I asked Amanda to marry me, I knew I was getting more than just a beautiful and intelligent wife. I was joining a family with deep roots in this community and a business legacy that represents everything I value about hard work and integrity." The words were perfectly calculated to appeal to our guests, particularly the older generation who remembered my father's rise from modest beginnings to significant success. But I could hear the subtle emphasis Ryan placed on joining the family business, revealing his true motivations to anyone who understood what to listen for. "Amanda has been an incredible partner in every sense of the word," Ryan continued, reaching for my hand with a gesture that appeared tender but felt possessive. "She's shown me what it means to build something lasting, and I'm excited to spend the rest of my life supporting her vision for Parker Industries and our family's future." The applause that followed was warm and genuine, reflecting the affection our community felt for the Parker family and their hopes for our happiness. I smiled and accepted congratulations with grace, playing my role perfectly while observing Ryan's performance and noting every word that would later demonstrate his calculated approach to our relationship. "We've decided to have the wedding next spring," I announced when the applause subsided, delivering the lines Ryan expected while keeping my voice steady and confident. "We want to take time to plan something that honors both of our families and provides a strong foundation for our marriage." What the guests heard was a romantic timeline that would allow for proper wedding planning. What Ryan heard was confirmation that his strategy was working and that he would have months to further establish himself within the family business before our legal union provided him with formal access to my inheritance. What I knew was that the timeline would provide ample opportunity for his true character to be fully documented and for all necessary legal protections to be finalized. As we stepped down from the stage, accepting congratulations and good wishes from guests, I noticed Daniel Morrison approaching through the crowd. His presence at the engagement party was expected given his long relationship with our family, but the timing of his approach suggested he had something specific to communicate. "Amanda, congratulations again," Daniel said, shaking both my hand and Ryan's with the professional warmth that had characterized his interactions with Parker family members for over a decade. "I wanted to let you know that all the financial arrangements we discussed have been finalized. Everything is exactly as you wanted it." His words were carefully chosen to sound like routine business communication to casual observers, but I understood that he was confirming the completion of the inheritance restructuring that would protect my assets regardless of how the evening's events ultimately unfolded. Ryan's slight frown suggested he was curious about what financial arrangements might have been made without his knowledge, but social convention prevented him from asking direct questions in front of other guests. "Thank you, Daniel," I replied. My father always emphasized the importance of having everything properly documented and legally secured. I'm glad we could honor his wishes so completely. The exchange lasted only a few moments, but it served multiple purposes simultaneously. Daniel's presence provided another professional witness to Ryan's behavior and public statements, while his confirmation of the financial arrangements gave me additional confidence that my inheritance was protected regardless of what happened next. Grace Henderson had positioned herself near the French doors leading to the garden pavilion, ostensibly enjoying the evening air, but actually monitoring the movements of guests who might venture outside for private conversations. As a family attorney, her presence at the engagement party was natural, but her strategic positioning allowed her to observe and potentially overhear any continued communication between Ryan and Vanessa. The evening progressed with the rhythm typical of Parker family social events, featuring multiple courses of carefully prepared food, several rounds of toasts from family friends and business associates, and the kind of meaningful conversation that strengthened community bonds while advancing various personal and professional relationships. But beneath the surface pleasantries, I could sense the tension building as Ryan and Vanessa struggled to maintain their performances while dealing with the stress of their deception. Vanessa had been circulating through the party with her usual social grace, accepting compliments on her appearance and participating in conversations about my upcoming wedding with the enthusiasm expected from a supportive sister. But I noticed that she was drinking more than usual, and her laughter had acquired a slightly forced quality that suggested she was working harder than normal to maintain her facade. Ryan's behavior showed similar signs of strain. His conversations with other guests seemed slightly too animated, and he was making more physical contact with me than was typical for him in social situations, as though he was overcompensating for his guilt by demonstrating public affection. More tellingly, he kept glancing toward the garden pavilion and checking his phone with a frequency that suggested he was either expecting additional communication from Vanessa or concerned about being observed. The breaking point came approximately an hour after Ryan's public announcement, when Marcus Thompson arrived at the party carrying what appeared to be a routine delivery, but was actually the final documentation we had been waiting for. His timing was perfect, arriving late enough in the evening that most guests were relaxed and less likely to pay attention to business communications, but early enough that key witnesses would still be present for what was about to unfold. "Miss Parker," Marcus said, approaching me with the formal courtesy he had maintained throughout our professional relationship. "I have those documents you requested. Everything has been verified and authenticated as you specified." He handed me a manila envelope with the same casualness he might use for any routine business delivery, but I knew it contained the complete evidence package documenting Ryan and Vanessa's affair, including photographs, financial records, and transcribed recordings of their conversations about manipulating my inheritance and undermining my position within the family business. "Thank you," I said, accepting the envelope with calm professionalism. "I'll review everything carefully and let you know if I need any additional information." The exchange was witnessed by several guests, including Eleanor Whitmore and Sophie Williams, establishing that I had received important documentation during the engagement party without revealing the specific nature of the contents. Ryan watched the interaction with obvious curiosity, but social convention prevented him from asking about private business matters in front of other people. As Marcus departed, I excused myself from the main party area, explaining that I needed to handle some urgent family business matters that couldn't wait until the following day. The explanation was accepted without question by guests who understood that significant family events often triggered various administrative requirements, particularly when substantial assets and business interests were involved. Grace Henderson followed me toward the Manor's library, where we had arranged to conduct the final review of evidence before proceeding with confrontation. The library had been my father's favorite room in the house, lined floor to ceiling with first-edition books and legal documents that chronicled 3 generations of Parker family history. It seemed appropriate that the room where he had planned so carefully for my protection would be where I made the final decision about how to proceed. "Everything you need is in this package," Grace said as we settled into the leather chairs beside my father's massive oak desk. Marcus exceeded even my expectations for thoroughness and attention to legal admissibility standards. She opened the envelope and spread the contents across the desk surface, organizing the materials into categories that told the complete story of Ryan and Vanessa's deception. Photographs showed them together in locations where they had claimed to be elsewhere. Financial records documented Ryan's mounting debts and his research into Parker Industries' value, and transcribed conversations revealed their explicit plans for manipulating my inheritance and marginalizing my influence within the family business. The recordings are particularly damaging, Grace noted, pointing to several pages of transcript that captured Ryan and Vanessa discussing specific strategies for undermining my confidence and isolating me from key business decisions after our marriage. They demonstrate clear intent to defraud, which triggers the character provisions your father included in his will. The evidence was overwhelming in both its scope and its implications. Ryan hadn't simply been unfaithful. He had been conducting a systematic campaign to position himself for financial gain through marriage, while simultaneously developing an alternative relationship that would allow him to access the Parker family. Wealth through Vanessa if his primary plan failed. Vanessa's involvement went far beyond sibling rivalry. She had been actively researching the family business structure and developing strategies to challenge my inheritance through legal and personal manipulation. "We have everything we need to trigger the inheritance protections immediately," Grace continued, reviewing a checklist she had prepared for this moment. "The documented evidence of deliberate deception meets all the legal standards your father established, and the financial restructuring we completed earlier this week means your assets are protected regardless of any claims Ryan might attempt to make." As we reviewed the final details of our legal strategy, I could hear the sounds of the engagement party continuing in the ballroom, with guests enjoying themselves and presumably assuming that Ryan and I were handling routine business matters. That would be concluded quickly. What they didn't know was that I was making the final preparations for confrontations that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of multiple lives and relationships. "Are you ready to proceed?" Grace asked, gathering the evidence materials back into organized files that could be presented clearly and systematically. "Once we begin the formal process, there won't be any opportunity to reverse course or seek alternative solutions." I considered her question carefully, thinking about the months of preparation that had led to this moment and the years of relationship history that would be ending within the next few hours. But I felt no hesitation or regret about the decision I was making. Ryan and Vanessa had chosen their path through deliberate deception and calculated betrayal, and they deserved to face the consequences of their choices. "I'm ready," I confirmed, standing to smooth my dress and check my appearance in the antique mirror that hung beside my father's diplomas and business awards. "Let's proceed with the confrontation exactly as we planned." As we prepared to return to the ballroom, I took one final look around the library that had been the center of my father's business planning and strategic thinking. The room represented everything the Parker family had built through 3 generations of careful decision-making and principled leadership, and I was determined to protect that legacy from people who viewed it as nothing more than an opportunity for personal enrichment. The time for observation and preparation had ended. Now it was time for truth to emerge and for consequences to align with choices, exactly as my father had planned when he built protection into his will, and exactly as I had prepared for during months of careful documentation and strategic positioning. Ryan and Vanessa were about to discover that the Parker family had not maintained its success by allowing deception to go unchallenged or betrayal to go unanswered. Walking back into the ballroom felt like entering a theater where I alone knew the script was about to change dramatically. The string quartet continued playing softly near the windows. Guests moved through conversations with wine glasses in hand, and the atmosphere remained celebratory and warm. Ryan stood near the champagne fountain, gesticulating animatedly as he spoke with 3 business associates who had known my father, clearly enjoying the role of future family patriarch. He believed he was cementing with each passing hour. Vanessa had positioned herself strategically near the dessert table, where her emerald dress caught the light perfectly, and her laughter rang out at precisely the right moments to maintain her image as the devoted sister celebrating her older sibling's happiness. But I could see the calculation behind her smile, the way her eyes tracked Ryan's movements while maintaining appropriate distance, and the subtle tension in her posture that suggested she was expending considerable energy to maintain her performance. Grace Henderson approached me with the measured steps of someone who understood the gravity of what was about to unfold, but maintained the professional composure that had made her one of Hartford's most respected attorneys. She carried a leather portfolio that appeared to contain routine legal documents, though I knew it held the evidence that would shatter the carefully constructed lies that had shaped this evening. "Amanda, there are some matters we need to address with Ryan before the evening concludes," Grace said, her voice carrying just enough authority to indicate the importance of the situation without alarming nearby guests. "Family business considerations that require his immediate attention and signature." Her choice of words was deliberate, framing what was about to happen as routine business administration rather than a confrontation about deception and betrayal. The approach would allow Ryan to accompany us without losing face in front of the assembled guests, while also establishing a professional context for what would follow. Ryan excused himself from his conversation and approached us with the confident stride of someone who believed he was being included in important family business decisions as a natural consequence of his upcoming marriage to me. His expression conveyed exactly the right blend of curiosity and readiness to handle whatever responsibilities were being offered to him. "Of course," Ryan said, smoothing his tie and checking his appearance with the unconscious gesture of someone preparing for an important business discussion. "I'm always available for family matters. Is this something that needs to be handled tonight, or would tomorrow be more appropriate?" His question revealed his assumption that he was being invited to participate in legitimate Parker family business, possibly related to wedding planning or his future role within the company structure. The confidence in his voice suggested he had no suspicion that his months of deception were about to be exposed through meticulously documented evidence. "Tonight would be best," Grace replied with the kind of authoritative tone that discouraged further questions. "We have a limited window to address these matters properly, and delay could create complications that would be difficult to resolve later." We moved toward the Manor's study, a smaller but equally impressive room adjacent to the library where my father had conducted his most sensitive business negotiations. The space was furnished with dark leather chairs arranged around a conference table, and the walls were lined with awards and photographs that chronicled the growth of Parker Industries from a modest vineyard to a significant player in wine distribution throughout New England. Eleanor Whitmore observed our departure with the keen attention of someone who understood that significant events were unfolding, though she maintained her conversation with other guests while noting who was leaving the main party area and when. Her presence as an independent witness would be crucial for establishing the timeline and context of what was about to occur. Sophie Williams caught my eye as we moved through the crowd, and I gave her a subtle nod that confirmed the conversation we had planned was about to begin. Her role would be to monitor the party atmosphere and ensure that other guests remained comfortable and entertained while the confrontation unfolded in private, preventing any disruption to the social gathering that might create gossip or speculation. As we settled into chairs around the conference table, Grace opened her portfolio and began arranging documents with the methodical precision that characterized her approach to complex legal matters. Ryan watched with apparent interest, clearly expecting to review contracts or agreements related to his integration into the family business structure. "Before we begin," Grace said, activating a small recording device she placed on the table's center, "I want to confirm that all parties understand this conversation is being documented for legal purposes. Ryan, do you consent to this recording?" Ryan's expression showed slight surprise at the formal approach, but he nodded without hesitation. "Of course. I have nothing to hide, and I want everything about my relationship with Amanda and my involvement with Parker Industries to be completely transparent." His response was exactly what we had hoped for, providing explicit consent for recording while establishing his public position that he had nothing to conceal about his motivations or behavior. the statement would be particularly significant when contrasted with the evidence we were about to present. Grace began by displaying financial records that documented Ryan's mounting debts and his recent research into Parker Industries' valuation and ownership structure. The documents showed a pattern of investigation that went far beyond casual interest in his future wife's family business, revealing detailed analysis of asset distribution, profit margins, and growth projections that suggested professional evaluation rather than personal curiosity. These are records of your financial situation and business research activities over the past several months, Grace said, presenting each document clearly and allowing Ryan time to examine the contents. Can you explain why you've been conducting such extensive analysis of Parker Industries' financial structure? Ryan's composure faltered slightly as he recognized documents he thought were private, but he quickly recovered with the smooth confidence that had served him well in previous difficult situations. I wanted to understand Amanda's family business thoroughly before joining it. Due diligence seemed appropriate for someone who plans to contribute to the company's future success. His explanation was reasonable on its surface, the kind of answer that might satisfy casual inquiry while avoiding direct acknowledgement of his true motivations. But Grace was prepared for exactly this type of deflection, and she moved systematically, through evidence that would make evasion increasingly difficult. The next set of documents revealed Ryan's communication with potential lenders and investors, showing that he had been presenting himself as a future controlling partner in Parker Industries to secure financing for his own family's struggling construction business. The emails and loan applications demonstrated that he had been using his engagement to me as collateral for business deals that assumed access to Parker family resources. These documents suggest you've been representing yourself as having authority within Parker Industries that you don't currently possess, Grace continued, her voice remaining professionally neutral while the implications of the evidence became increasingly clear. Can you explain the discrepancy between your actual role and the representations you've made to financial institutions? Ryan's face flushed as he realized the scope of documentation that had been assembled, but he maintained his defensive posture while scrambling for explanations that might minimize the damage. Those were preliminary discussions based on anticipated future involvement with the company. I may have been overly optimistic about timelines, but my intentions were always legitimate. His response revealed the calculating mindset that had characterized his approach to our relationship, treating marriage as a business transaction that would provide access to resources and opportunities rather than a personal commitment based on genuine affection. But the evidence Grace was presenting systematically dismantled any possibility that his deception could be characterized as innocent optimism. The recordings came next, played through a small speaker that filled the study, with the voices of Ryan and Vanessa discussing their plans for manipulating my inheritance and undermining my authority within the family business. The conversations were clear and unambiguous, revealing explicit intent to defraud and demonstrating coordination between them that went far beyond simple infidelity. She'll be so focused on wedding planning that she won't notice us repositioning. The business relationships, Vanessa's voice emerged from the speaker with startling clarity. Amanda has always been too trusting, and she actually believes everyone has her best interests at heart. Ryan's response was equally damaging to any claim of innocent intentions. The inheritance structure gives me significant leverage once we're married. If she starts doubting herself, she'll defer to my judgment on major decisions. Your father's will creates opportunities we can exploit systematically. The color drained from Ryan's face as he heard his own words played back, revealing conversations he had believed were completely private. His carefully maintained facade of righteousness crumbled as he realized that months of deception had been captured in recordings that could not be explained away or minimized. This is taken out of context, Ryan protested, though his voice lacked conviction and his body language suggested he understood the futility of denying evidence that was so comprehensive and damaging. Those conversations don't represent my true feelings about Amanda or my commitment to our relationship. Grace continued presenting evidence without acknowledging his protests, maintaining the methodical approach that would ensure every aspect of his deception was documented clearly. Photographs showed him with Vanessa in locations where they had claimed to be elsewhere. Financial records traced expenditures that contradicted their stated activities, and communication logs revealed a pattern of coordination that demonstrated premeditation rather than spontaneous infidelity. The final piece of evidence was perhaps the most devastating. A recording of Ryan and Vanessa discussing specific strategies for isolating me from key business relationships and gradually transferring control of Parker Industries to Ryan through marriage, while positioning Vanessa to claim a larger portion of the inheritance through legal challenges based on my supposed emotional instability. Amanda's always been the smart one, but she's never been street smart. Ryan's voice filled the study with words that revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of my character and capabilities. Once we're married, I can use her trust against her. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her if I frame it as protecting the family legacy. The silence that followed the conclusion of the recordings was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of the engagement party continuing in the ballroom. Ryan sat motionless, staring at the conference table as the full scope of his exposed deception settled around him like a net he could not escape. The evidence demonstrates deliberate fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, Grace said, breaking the silence with clinical precision. Under the terms of Thomas Parker's will, these actions disqualify you from any inheritance considerations and void any claims you might have made based on your engagement to Amanda. Ryan's head snapped up as he realized that his financial motivations for pursuing marriage had been not only exposed but legally neutralized. The inheritance he had been scheming to access was already beyond his reach, and the family business he had hoped to control was protected by legal structures he had never suspected existed. "You can't do this," Ryan said, his voice rising with the desperation of someone realizing that carefully laid plans were collapsing around him. "I have rights as Amanda's fiancé. You can't just cut me out based on recordings that might not even be admissible in court." Grace opened another folder and presented documents that had been prepared in anticipation of exactly this response. The recordings were obtained legally with proper authorization based on concerns about potential fraud. Additionally, Amanda has restructured her inheritance through independent legal channels that place her assets beyond any claims you might attempt to make. The documents she displayed showed the comprehensive legal framework we had constructed to protect my inheritance, regardless of my marital status. Ryan's face went pale as he realized that not only had his deception been exposed, but the financial motivations that had driven his entire relationship with me had been systematically eliminated. "Where is Vanessa in all this?" Ryan asked, apparently hoping to deflect attention from his own culpability by implicating my sister in the scheme they had developed together. "She was equally involved in everything we discussed. If I'm guilty of deception, then she's just as responsible." His attempt to shift blame revealed the character flaws that had made his betrayal possible in the first place. Rather than accepting responsibility for his choices or expressing remorse for the pain he had caused, Ryan was immediately seeking to minimize his own accountability by pointing to others' involvement. "Vanessa will be addressed separately," Grace replied with the cool professionalism that prevented Ryan from gaining any information about how we planned to handle my sister's role in their deception. "This conversation is focused on your conduct and the legal consequences of your actions." She presented the final set of documents, legal notices that would formally dissolve our engagement and establish my complete independence from any claims Ryan might attempt to make based on our relationship. The papers had been prepared with the same thoroughness that characterized every aspect of our defensive strategy, ensuring that no loopholes existed that might allow him to continue pursuing access to Parker family resources. "You have 24 hours to remove your belongings from any Parker family properties and cease all contact with Amanda and her business associates," Grace informed him, her tone leaving no room for negotiation or appeal. Violation of these terms will result in immediate legal action for harassment and continued fraud. Ryan stared at the documents with the expression of someone watching his carefully constructed future disintegrate in real time. The confident, charming man who had entered the study expecting to discuss his integration into the Parker family business had been reduced to someone facing the complete collapse of his plans and the exposure of his character flaws to the community where he had hoped to build his reputation. "This is all a misunderstanding," Ryan said, making one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of his deception. "I admit there may have been some poor judgment involved, but my feelings for Amanda are genuine. We can work through this situation if everyone approaches it reasonably." His words revealed a fundamental disconnection from reality that explained how he had convinced himself that his calculated manipulation could coexist with genuine affection. But the evidence spread across the conference table made any claim of sincere feelings impossible to sustain or believe. "Your belongings will be packed and made available for pickup tomorrow afternoon," Grace said, effectively ending any discussion about reconciliation or alternative arrangements. "All keys and access credentials must be returned at that time." As the confrontation concluded, I realized that the most striking aspect of the entire exchange had been Ryan's complete focus on the financial and legal consequences he was facing, rather than any acknowledgement of the personal betrayal he had committed. His concerns centered entirely on protecting his reputation and minimizing the damage to his future prospects, with no apparent recognition of the emotional harm he had caused or the relationships he had destroyed through his deception. The study door opened to admit Daniel Morrison, who had been waiting in the adjacent library to provide additional support if the confrontation escalated beyond what Grace and I could handle alone. His presence reminded Ryan that the Parker family's professional network was extensive and unified in protecting my interests, making any attempt at retaliation or continued manipulation futile. "The financial arrangements Amanda requested have been implemented completely," Daniel informed Grace, providing confirmation that all protective measures were now in place. "Everything is secured exactly as specified, with no remaining vulnerabilities." Ryan's expression showed that he understood the finality of what was being communicated. The inheritance he had schemed to access was permanently beyond his reach. The business opportunities he had pursued through deception were closed to him, and the future he had planned based on marriage to me had been systematically dismantled, through evidence of his own making. As Grace gathered the documents and prepared to conclude the meeting, I spoke directly to Ryan for the first time since the confrontation had begun. My voice was steady and clear, reflecting the calm certainty that had guided my preparation for this moment. "You underestimated me from the beginning," I said, meeting his eyes with the confidence that came from complete vindication of my suspicions and thorough protection of my interests. "You thought I was naive and trusting, but those qualities were never the same as being foolish or unprepared." Ryan's response was immediate and revealing of his true character even in defeat. "You orchestrated this entire situation. You let me walk into a trap while pretending to trust me." His accusation demonstrated the narcissistic mindset that had made his betrayal possible, blaming me for exposing his deception rather than accepting responsibility for the choices that had created the situation. But his words also confirmed that he finally understood the scope of my preparation and the deliberate nature of my response to his betrayal. "I documented the truth," I corrected him, standing to signal that the conversation was ending. "Everything we discovered about your conduct came from your own actions and choices. You created this situation through deception, and you'll face the consequences through the same legal and social systems you tried to manipulate." The confrontation concluded with Ryan leaving the study in defeat, his confident demeanor replaced by the posture of someone who had been thoroughly outmaneuvered and exposed. The engagement party continued in the ballroom, with most guests unaware that the evening's celebrated relationship had just ended definitively in the adjacent room. But my work for the evening was not finished. Vanessa remained at the party, continuing her performance as the supportive sister while believing that her role in the deception remained hidden. The next phase of the evening would require addressing her betrayal with the same methodical precision we had applied to Ryan's exposure, ensuring that both conspirators faced appropriate consequences for their calculated attempt to manipulate my inheritance and destroy my trust. Returning to the ballroom after Ryan's departure felt like stepping back onto a stage where only I knew the script had fundamentally changed. The guests continued their conversations with wine glasses in hand. The string quartet played softly near the windows, and the atmosphere remained celebratory despite the fact that the guest of honor had just been exposed as a fraud and permanently expelled from the Parker family circle. Vanessa stood near the terrace doors, her emerald dress catching the soft lighting as she engaged in animated conversation with several family friends who had known her since childhood. Her laughter rang out at precisely the right moments, and her posture conveyed the relaxed confidence of someone who believed her deception remained perfectly concealed. She had no idea that Ryan had just been confronted with irrefutable evidence of their affair, and that her own involvement was about to be addressed with equal thoroughness. Eleanor Whitmore approached me with the measured steps of someone who understood that significant developments had occurred during my absence from the main party. Her expression conveyed both curiosity about what had transpired and readiness to provide whatever support might be needed for the next phase of the evening's events. "I trust your business matters were resolved satisfactorily," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the diplomatic tone that allowed for multiple interpretations while indicating her awareness that something important had taken place. "Some situations require immediate attention to prevent complications later." Her comment was carefully chosen to acknowledge that she had observed Ryan's subdued departure from the manor, without requiring me to provide details that might be inappropriate for public discussion. Eleanor's discretion and social intelligence had made her invaluable throughout the evening as both witness and advisor. "Everything proceeded exactly as planned," I replied, accepting a fresh champagne glass from a passing server while scanning the room to locate the other key players in what was about to unfold. Some revelations require careful timing to ensure all interested parties receive appropriate information. Sophie Williams caught my eye from across the room where she was, maintaining conversations with guests who had begun asking casual questions about Ryan's early departure. Her responses were perfectly calibrated to deflect curiosity without creating speculation, suggesting that he had been called away on urgent business matters that couldn't wait until the following day. Grace Henderson remained in the study, preparing the documentation that would be needed for the second confrontation of the evening. The evidence against Vanessa was equally comprehensive as what we had presented to Ryan, but it required different presentation strategies because her motivations and methods had been distinct from his approach to the deception. Daniel Morrison positioned himself near the main entrance to the ballroom, ostensibly mingling with guests, but actually ensuring that Vanessa couldn't leave the party without being observed. His role was to provide discreet monitoring while maintaining the social atmosphere that would keep other guests comfortable and unaware of the drama unfolding among the Parker family members. The challenge with confronting Vanessa lay in her different relationship to both the family and the situation. Unlike Ryan, who was an outsider attempting to gain access to Parker family resources through marriage, Vanessa was my sister and a legitimate heir to a portion of the estate. Her betrayal was more personal and complex, involving not just romantic deception, but sibling rivalry and calculated attempts to undermine my position within the family structure. Additionally, Vanessa possessed intimate knowledge of family dynamics and business operations that Ryan had lacked, making her a more sophisticated adversary who might attempt to manipulate the confrontation through emotional appeals or claims of misunderstanding that could complicate the resolution we were seeking. I moved through the party with the grace expected of a hostess, accepting congratulations on my engagement, while knowing that the relationship being celebrated had ended definitively in the adjacent room. The irony of the situation was almost overwhelming, but it was tempered by the satisfaction of knowing that truth was finally emerging after months of careful preparation and strategic positioning. Marcus Thompson appeared at the party's periphery, carrying what appeared to be additional business documents, but was actually supplementary evidence related to Vanessa's involvement in the deception. His timing was coordinated with Grace's preparation in the study, ensuring that all materials would be available when the second confrontation began. "Miss Parker," Marcus said, approaching with the same professional courtesy he had maintained throughout our investigative relationship. "I have the additional documentation you requested. Everything has been verified through independent sources and prepared according to your specifications." He handed me a second manila envelope, this one containing evidence specific to Vanessa's role in the scheme to manipulate my inheritance and undermine my authority within Parker Industries. The materials included photographs of her meetings with Ryan in locations where they had claimed to be elsewhere, records of her research into the family business structure, and recordings of conversations where she had explicitly discussed strategies for challenging my inheritance through legal and personal manipulation. "Thank you," I said, accepting the envelope with the same calm professionalism I had maintained throughout the evening. "Please ensure that all original materials are secured according to the procedures we discussed." The exchange was witnessed by several guests, establishing that I was continuing to handle important family business matters while maintaining my responsibilities as hostess for the engagement party. The documentation created a clear timeline of events that would be significant if legal proceedings became necessary later. As Marcus departed, I noticed that Vanessa had been watching our interaction with obvious curiosity. Her expression suggested she was beginning to suspect that the business matters I was handling might be more significant than routine administrative tasks, but she maintained her position near the terrace doors while continuing her conversation with family friends. The moment had arrived to initiate the second phase of the evening's confrontations. I approached Vanessa with the same measured steps I had used when requesting Ryan's presence for business discussions, maintaining the social grace expected at family gatherings while preparing to address the most personal betrayal I had ever experienced. "Vanessa, there are some family matters Grace needs to discuss with both of us," I said, my voice carrying enough authority to indicate the importance of the request without alarming nearby guests. "Legal considerations that require immediate attention before the evening concludes." Vanessa's expression showed slight surprise at the formal approach, but she nodded with the compliance expected from family members when business matters required attention. Her confident demeanor suggested she had no suspicion that her months of deception were about to be exposed through the same comprehensive evidence that had destroyed Ryan's plans. "Of course," Vanessa replied, smoothing her emerald dress and checking her appearance with the unconscious gesture of someone preparing for what she assumed would be routine family business. "I'm always available for anything the family needs." Her response revealed the same assumption Ryan had made, that she was being included in legitimate Parker family business discussions rather than being called to account for systematic betrayal and attempted fraud. The confidence in her voice indicated she believed her performance throughout the evening had been flawless, and that her deception remained undetected. We moved toward the study, where Grace was waiting with the evidence that would shatter Vanessa's carefully constructed lies. The space felt different now, charged with the energy of truth that had emerged during the first confrontation, and prepared for the second revelation that would complete the evening's work. Eleanor Whitmore observed our departure with the same keen attention she had shown when Ryan accompanied us earlier, though she maintained her conversation with other guests while noting the participants and timing of what was clearly another significant family discussion. Her presence as an independent witness continued to be crucial for establishing the proper context of events. Sophie Williams received another subtle signal from me as we moved through the crowd, confirming that she should continue managing the party atmosphere while ensuring that guests remained comfortable despite the absence of both the bride-to-be and her sister from the main celebration. Her role in maintaining social normalcy was essential for preventing speculation that might complicate the situation later. As we entered the study, Grace rose from the conference table where she had arranged a new set of documents with the same methodical precision that had characterized the previous confrontation. The recording device remained in place, ready to capture whatever admissions or denials Vanessa might make when presented with evidence of her involvement in the deception. "Vanessa, please have a seat," Grace said, gesturing toward the same chair Ryan had occupied during his exposure and downfall. "We need to discuss some serious concerns about your recent activities and their impact on family business matters." Vanessa settled into the leather chair with the poise she had always maintained in family business discussions, clearly expecting to participate in routine administrative matters related to my engagement or upcoming wedding plans. Her expression conveyed curiosity mixed with the slight impatience of someone who had been enjoying a social event and was now required to handle less interesting practical considerations. "Before we begin," Grace continued, activating the recording device with the same formal approach she had used with Ryan, "I want to confirm that you understand this conversation is being documented for legal purposes. Do you consent to this? Recording?" Vanessa's eyebrows raised slightly at the formal approach, but she nodded without hesitation. "Certainly. I have nothing to hide about anything I've done. My commitment to Amanda and the family has always been completely transparent." Her response was exactly what we had hoped for, providing explicit consent for recording while establishing her public position that she had nothing to conceal about her motivations or behavior. The statement would become particularly significant when contrasted with the evidence Grace was about to present. Grace began by displaying photographs that showed Vanessa and Ryan together in locations where they had claimed to be elsewhere, images that documented a pattern of deception that extended over several months. The pictures were clear and unambiguous, showing intimate contact and private conversations that could not be explained as innocent family interactions or business discussions. These photographs were taken during times when you claimed to be in different locations pursuing other activities, Grace said, presenting each image clearly and allowing Vanessa time to examine the contents. "Can you explain the discrepancy between your stated activities and what these images document?" Vanessa's composure faltered as she recognized herself in compromising positions with Ryan, but she quickly recovered with the smooth deflection that had served her well in previous difficult situations. "Those must be taken out of context. Ryan and I have been coordinating wedding planning activities for Amanda. Private discussions were necessary to ensure surprise elements remained confidential." Her explanation was superficially plausible, the kind of answer that might satisfy casual inquiry, while avoiding direct acknowledgement of the romantic relationship the photographs clearly documented. But Grace was prepared for exactly this type of evasion, and she moved systematically through evidence that would make denial increasingly impossible. The next set of documents revealed Vanessa's extensive research into Parker Industries' ownership structure and inheritance provisions, showing analysis that went far beyond casual interest in family business matters. The materials demonstrated detailed investigation of asset distribution, legal vulnerabilities, and strategies for challenging the existing will through various legal mechanisms. "These records show you've been conducting comprehensive analysis of the Parker family trust and inheritance structure," Grace continued, her voice remaining professionally neutral while the implications of the evidence became increasingly clear. "Can you explain why you've been researching legal strategies for challenging your father's will?" Vanessa's face flushed as she realized the scope of documentation that had been assembled, revealing activities she had believed were completely private. Her defensive posture stiffened as she scrambled for explanations that might minimize the obvious implications of her research. "I wanted to understand our family's financial situation completely," Vanessa said, her voice rising slightly with the stress of defending increasingly indefensible positions. "As a legitimate heir, I have every right to know how the estate is structured and what options might be available if circumstances change." Her response revealed the calculating mindset that had driven her involvement in the deception, treating family relationships as strategic assets that could be manipulated for personal advantage, rather than bonds built on affection and trust. But the evidence Grace was presenting systematically dismantled any possibility that her research could be characterized as innocent family interest. The recordings came next, filling the study with Vanessa's voice as she discussed explicit strategies for undermining my authority within the family business and positioning herself to claim a larger portion of the inheritance through legal challenges based on my supposed emotional instability and poor judgment in romantic relationships. Amanda's always been too focused on business to understand people. Vanessa's voice emerged from the speaker with startling clarity. If we can demonstrate that her judgment is compromised by emotional factors, we can challenge her fitness to manage the family assets effectively. The conversation continued with Ryan's voice joining hers as they planned specific approaches for isolating me from key business relationships and gradually transferring practical control of Parker Industries to Ryan through marriage, while Vanessa pursued legal remedies to increase her inheritance share. She trusts me completely because we're sisters. Vanessa's recorded voice filled the study with words that revealed the depth of her betrayal. I can influence her decisions in ways that an outsider never could. Family loyalty makes her vulnerable to manipulation that she would recognize immediately from anyone else. The color drained from Vanessa's face as she heard her own words played back, revealing conversations she had believed were completely confidential. Her carefully maintained facade of sisterly devotion crumbled as she realized that months of calculated manipulation had been captured in recordings that could not be explained away or minimized. "This is entrapment," Vanessa protested, though her voice lacked conviction, and her body language suggested she understood the futility of denying evidence that was so comprehensive and damaging. "Those conversations don't represent my true feelings about Amanda or my commitment to our family relationship." Grace continued presenting evidence without acknowledging her protests, maintaining the methodical approach that would ensure every aspect of her deception was documented clearly. Financial records showed attempts to establish independent relationships with Parker Industries suppliers and distributors. Communication logs revealed coordination with Ryan that demonstrated premeditation rather than spontaneous romantic involvement. And legal research documented specific strategies for challenging my inheritance that required months of careful planning. The final piece of evidence was perhaps the most devastating personally, a recording of Vanessa discussing her long-term resentment about my position as the elder daughter and primary heir to the Parker family legacy. Her words revealed feelings that went far beyond sibling rivalry, expressing genuine anger about what she perceived as unfair advantages I had received simply by being born first. "Amanda has never had to work for anything." Vanessa's voice filled the study with bitterness that had apparently been building for years. Everything was handed to her because she happened to be born 2 years earlier. The business, the inheritance, even people's respect. It's all based on accident of birth rather than actual merit or capability. The recording continued with her explicit plans for using Ryan's marriage to me as a vehicle for redistributing family wealth and authority in ways that would provide her with what she felt she deserved based on her own assessment of our relative contributions to the family legacy. The silence that followed the conclusion of the recordings was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of the engagement party continuing in the ballroom. Vanessa sat motionless, staring at the conference table as the full scope of her exposed deception and revealed resentment settled around her like a judgment she could not escape. "The evidence demonstrates deliberate fraud and violation of fiduciary duty to family interests," Grace said, breaking the silence with clinical precision. "Your actions have compromised your position within the family trust and triggered protective provisions that will affect your inheritance status." Vanessa's head snapped up as she realized that her schemes had not only been exposed, but had activated legal consequences that would reduce her access to the family wealth she had been trying to manipulate. The inheritance she had been plotting to increase was now in jeopardy because of the very actions she had taken to secure it. "You can't punish me for having private conversations," Vanessa said, her voice rising with desperation as she realized the scope of consequences she was facing. "I'm your sister. Family members have disagreements and express frustrations. That doesn't make me a criminal." Grace opened another folder and presented documents that had been prepared in anticipation of exactly this response. The recorded conversations document explicit plans for fraud and conspiracy to manipulate inheritance distributions. Additionally, your research into legal challenges constitutes evidence of intent to pursue litigation against family interests. The documents she displayed showed the legal framework that had been constructed to protect the Parker family assets from exactly the kind of internal manipulation Vanessa had been planning. Her face went pale as she realized that her own recorded words provided the evidence necessary to invoke protective measures that would significantly reduce her inheritance and eliminate her influence within the family business structure. "Where does this leave me?" Vanessa asked, her defiant posture collapsing as she confronted the reality that her carefully planned manipulation had backfired completely. "What happens to my portion of the inheritance? What about my relationship with the family?" Her questions revealed the same self-centered focus that had driven her betrayal in the first place, concentrating on the personal consequences she would face rather than acknowledging the damage she had caused to family relationships and trust. But they also indicated that she was beginning to understand the finality of what had been discovered and documented. "Your inheritance will be reduced according to the provisions your father included for situations involving family disloyalty and attempts at fraud," Grace informed her with the cool professionalism that prevented any negotiation or appeal. "The exact amount will be determined through legal processes that account for the extent of damage caused by your actions." She presented the final set of documents, legal notices that would formally address Vanessa's reduced status within the family trust and establish restrictions on her access to Parker Industries' operations and decision-making processes. The papers had been prepared with the same thoroughness that characterized every aspect of our defensive strategy. "You have forfeited your position of trust within the family through documented deception and conspiracy," Grace continued, her tone leaving no room for argument or alternative interpretation. "These legal changes are effective immediately and will be enforced through appropriate channels." Vanessa stared at the documents with the expression of someone watching her entire future being redefined by consequences she had never anticipated. The sister who had entered the study expecting routine family business discussions was being reduced to someone whose inheritance and family standing had been permanently diminished by her own choices and recorded admissions. "This is permanent?" Vanessa asked, apparently still hoping for some possibility of redemption or reconciliation that might restore her previous position within the family structure. "There's no way to address this situation through discussion or compromise?" Her question revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the gravity of what she had done and the comprehensiveness of the evidence that had been assembled against her. The betrayal she had committed went far beyond simple sibling rivalry or romantic competition, involving calculated fraud and conspiracy that had triggered irreversible legal consequences. "The evidence speaks for itself," I said, speaking directly to my sister for the first time since the confrontation had begun. "You chose deception and manipulation over family loyalty. These are the natural consequences of those choices." Vanessa's response was immediate and revealing of her character even in defeat. "You orchestrated this entire situation to destroy me. You pretended to trust me while gathering evidence to use against me." Her accusation demonstrated the same narcissistic mindset that had made her betrayal possible, blaming me for exposing her deception rather than accepting responsibility for the choices that had created the situation. But her words also confirmed that she finally understood the scope of my preparation and the deliberate nature of my response to her betrayal. 3 months after the engagement party that changed everything, I stood in the renovated offices of Parker Industries, reviewing quarterly reports that showed record profits and expansion into new market territories. The company had not only survived the dramatic family upheaval, but had thrived under my undivided leadership, freed from the distractions and manipulations that had been undermining our progress for months. The morning brought news that Ryan had accepted a mid-level position with a construction firm in Denver, a significant step down from the executive role he had envisioned for himself as part of the Parker family empire. His reputation in Connecticut business circles had suffered irreparable damage once word spread about the circumstances surrounding our broken engagement, though I had been careful to let the truth emerge naturally rather than engaging in public vindictiveness. Vanessa had relocated to California, where she was attempting to rebuild her modeling career with the reduced inheritance that remained after the legal provisions our father had established for family disloyalty were fully implemented. Our relationship had ended completely, with no communication since that final confrontation in the study. Some bridges, once burned by calculated betrayal, could never be rebuilt without compromising the structural integrity of everything that remained. Grace Henderson knocked on my office door, carrying a leather portfolio that I recognized as containing the final legal documents related to the inheritance restructuring and family trust modifications. Her expression conveyed the satisfaction of someone who had successfully protected a client's interests against sophisticated threats, while maintaining the highest ethical standards throughout the process. "Everything has been finalized according to your specifications," Grace said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the comfortable familiarity that had developed during our months of strategic collaboration. "The new trust structure ensures complete protection of your assets and eliminates any remaining vulnerabilities that could be exploited by future manipulation attempts." She opened the portfolio to reveal documents that formalized my complete control over Parker Industries and the family estate, with legal protections that would prevent anyone from gaining access to family resources through marriage or other relationships. The provisions our father had originally included for character evaluation had been expanded and strengthened, creating an impenetrable framework that preserved the Parker legacy for future generations. "What about the charitable foundation?" I asked, reviewing the sections that addressed the philanthropic initiatives that had always been important to our family's community involvement. "Fully established and operational," Grace confirmed, pointing to relevant pages that outlined the structure we had created. "The foundation will provide scholarships for young women pursuing business education, with particular emphasis on family business management and ethical leadership development." The foundation represented transformation of something positive from the wreckage of personal betrayal, ensuring that other young women would have opportunities to develop the skills and knowledge necessary to protect themselves and their family, legacies from the kinds of manipulation I had encountered. Daniel Morrison joined us for the final review session, bringing financial reports that demonstrated the company's strengthened position and improved performance metrics since the removal of disruptive influences from our decision-making processes. His analysis showed increased efficiency, better strategic focus, and enhanced employee morale that reflected the authentic leadership culture we had been able to establish. "The expansion into the Vermont market has exceeded all projections," Daniel reported, displaying charts that illustrated substantial growth in both revenue and market share. "The distributors are particularly impressed with our streamlined decision-making, process, and consistent strategic vision." The business success felt deeply satisfying, not as revenge against those who had betrayed me, but as validation of the authentic approach to leadership that had been constrained by the need to accommodate Ryan's ego and Vanessa's manipulative interference. Parker Industries was finally operating according to its true potential, unencumbered by internal politics and deception. Eleanor Whitmore had become a regular advisor, attending monthly family business meetings where her wisdom and historical perspective provided invaluable guidance for long-term strategic planning. Her presence also served as a connection to the values and principles that had guided previous generations of Parker family leadership, ensuring continuity with our foundational legacy. "Your father would be extraordinarily proud," Eleanor said during our most recent consultation, reviewing the expansion plans and community investment initiatives that were defining the company's future direction. "He always believed that the true test of leadership was not avoiding challenges, but responding to them with integrity and strategic intelligence." Her words carried special weight because she had known my father during his early years building the business, witnessing firsthand the character traits and decision-making approaches that had created the foundation I was now building upon. Her validation confirmed that my response to betrayal had honored rather than compromised the family traditions that mattered most. The personal healing had been more gradual but equally significant. The house I had shared with Ryan was sold within 6 weeks of our broken engagement, and I had purchased a smaller but more elegant property that reflected my individual taste rather than compromised choices made to accommodate someone else's preferences. Every room in the new house was designed according to my own vision, creating a space that supported both personal restoration and professional productivity. Sophie Williams had remained a steadfast friend throughout the transition, providing emotional support while respecting my need to process the betrayal privately, rather than turning it into social drama. Her loyalty during the crisis had deepened our friendship, creating bonds based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than mere convenience or shared history. "You've become more yourself than I've ever seen you," Sophie observed during one of our regular dinner conversations at the new house. "It's like removing the people who were draining your energy allowed your authentic personality to emerge fully." Her insight resonated deeply because it captured something I had felt but couldn't articulate clearly. The end of my engagement and the estrangement from Vanessa had been devastating initially, but they had also created space for personal growth and self-discovery that wouldn't have been possible while accommodating their demands and manipulations. Marcus Thompson submitted his final report 3 months after the engagement party, providing documentation that closed the investigative phase of the situation while ensuring that all evidence remained properly preserved in case future legal action became necessary. His thoroughness and professionalism had been instrumental in building the comprehensive case that had protected my interests so effectively. "No further surveillance is indicated," Marcus concluded in his final summary. "Both subjects have relocated outside Connecticut and shown no evidence of attempting continued contact or retaliation. The legal framework established appears to have achieved complete deterrence of future interference." His report provided closure on the investigative aspects of the situation, while confirming that the protective measures we had implemented were functioning exactly as intended. The threats that had seemed so overwhelming during the months of preparation had been neutralized through careful documentation and strategic legal action. The engagement ring Ryan had given me was returned to the jeweler with a request that it be reset into a pendant for the charitable foundation, transforming a symbol of deception into something that would support other women's educational opportunities. The gesture felt symbolically appropriate, converting something that had represented false promises into a tangible benefit for future generations. Community response to the broken engagement had been surprisingly supportive once people understood the general circumstances involved. While I shared no specific details about the evidence we had gathered, the fact that both Ryan and Vanessa had left town quickly after the engagement party created natural speculation that supported my reputation rather than damaging it. Othering my Grandview Country Club, where we had planned to hold our wedding reception, converted our deposit into a credit for future events, with the understanding that I might want to use their facilities for corporate functions or charitable activities. Their gracious response reflected the respect the Parker family had earned through decades of community involvement and ethical business practices. Mrs. Henderson approached me at a recent charity event with a perspective that helped frame the entire experience in broader context. "Sometimes the most painful revelations are actually gifts," she said, her wisdom earned through decades of observing family dynamics and social relationships. "Discovering someone's true character before making irreversible commitments is fortunate, regardless of how difficult the discovery process might be." Her words reminded me that the timing of Ryan and Vanessa's exposure had actually protected me from far greater damage that would have occurred if their deception had continued until after marriage or if their manipulation of family assets had been allowed to proceed unchecked. The new office I had created in the Manor's library, surrounded by my father's business books and family photographs, became a sanctuary where I could work on strategic planning without external pressures or compromise considerations. The space represented everything I had fought to protect: family legacy, personal integrity, and the freedom to make decisions based on authentic values rather than manipulation. Looking back on the events that had transformed my life so dramatically, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't the exposure of Ryan and Vanessa's betrayal or the protection of my inheritance. The real triumph was the discovery of my own strength and capability when facing sophisticated threats to everything I valued most. The engagement party that was supposed to celebrate my future with Ryan had instead become the catalyst for reclaiming my authentic identity and building a life based on truth rather than accommodation. The email I never received, the confession that never came, the apology that would never be offered, none of those things mattered anymore because I had created something better from the wreckage of their deception. Parker Industries continued, growing under leadership that honored our family's values while embracing innovation and community responsibility. The charitable foundation was providing opportunities for young women to develop the skills they would need to protect their own legacies. My personal life was centered around genuine relationships built on mutual respect and shared values. The final irony was that Ryan and Vanessa's betrayal had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened everything they had tried to destroy. The family business was more successful, my personal relationships were more authentic, and my own character had been tested and proven under circumstances that revealed both my vulnerabilities and my capabilities. Standing in my office on a crisp autumn morning, reviewing plans for expansion that would honor my father's vision while building toward future generations, I felt profound gratitude for the painful lessons that had shaped this stronger foundation. The people who had tried to manipulate me had instead taught me the value of vigilance, preparation, and unwavering commitment to truth. The inheritance they had schemed to steal was safer than ever, protected by legal structures that ensured it would serve legitimate family interests for generations to come. The sister who had betrayed me was facing the natural consequences of her choices, learning lessons about character and loyalty that no amount of money could purchase. The fiancé who had deceived me was discovering that reputation and trust, once lost through calculated manipulation, were nearly impossible to rebuild. But most importantly, I had emerged from their betrayal stronger, wiser, and more authentically myself than ever before. The engagement party they had planned to exploit as the foundation for their deception had instead become the launching point for a life of genuine success and meaningful relationships. The champagne glass that had shattered on the marble steps that night had been quickly swept away, but the clarity it had symbolized remained permanent. Some revelations, however painful initially, ultimately provide the foundation for everything better that follows. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.